and the sword dead to skewer people with the psychological skewering spear as well, just to drive that home as well. Yeah, when you need it, that only comes out at certain times, I suppose.
I mean, that's going to be great out of context, that one. Psychological skewering spear. Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Wild Bill Bones.
Hello there.
And we're going to focus our attention on the induction process from the perspective of both the school and the inductee. But first, Lloyd, what you reading for?
Hey, what you reading for?
So this week, I've been dipping back into Intelligent Accountability by David Didow. Sorry. It's a lovely little book that for leaders. If you're, if you're thinking about just going over your leadership style and kind of thinking about how your culture is in your school. I think it came out a few years back now through John Catt, and it's just a great little book. You can easily pick it up and just dip into it. That's a nice thing I like about it. It's not, he writes really, really well, and it's just written in a way which really probes your thinking. And I often pick it up and just think, and it just gives me food for thought on certain different little things about leadership. So the bit that I was sort of reading last night was about how not all accountability is equal. I thought it's quite interesting, and he quotes some different bits of people in that book. So like he said, he quotes Lerner and Tetlock and says, accountability is not a cognitive cure-all for lazy or unresponsive workers. That is him quoting in there, which I think is quite interesting, because there's a certain level of accountability that we need as humans to be able to do our jobs effectively. Because if we had no accountability, human nature is, unfortunately, that we would be lazy and we take shortcuts, because just that's path of least resistance. So, but also, as we know, the adverse effects of overbearing accountability as well. And there's a lovely little table in the book that he's adapted from Matthew Evans's book of Leaders with Substance, and he's got it split into two columns, and it's what looking good is and what being good is. So like in the looking good column, it's things like getting high results, and then the being good equivalent would be like providing a rich and rounded education. Looking good is being popular with students. Being good is trying to meet students' needs. It's just, and it goes on. I won't name them all, but it just got me thinking. And the last little bit in that chapter says, how can we trust teachers to be good instead of forcing them into looking good? And I just think that just sort of resonated with me a little bit about our practices, our leadership, and thinking are we true and honest and authentic with our staff and how we lead, and just an excellent book for any leader really to pick up, middle leader or senior leader, to consider some of your sort of leadership practices. So, Max, what you reading for?
Yeah, and obviously David's been ahead of the curve for quite a while, so when he was writing that, probably wasn't commonplace thought in most schools. Yeah, so definitely check that out. I've got a paper shared by Nilo, and it's called Verbal Labels Influence Children's Processing of Decimal Magnitudes, and obviously the maths nerds amongst us will be thinking that sounds great.
Yeah.
But for those who maybe, need convincing, they start off the extract by saying, verbal labels for math concepts include point labels, so 4.2, decomposed labels, 4/10 and 2/100, and common unit labels, 40/200. And obviously you can discuss that one idea with those three different labels. And so without sort of giving too much away, this paper explores that idea in terms of, where should we go with our thinking on this. So we're checking out in a great spot by Mr. Almond.
Sounds suitably mathsy and nerdish, and I will look forward to potentially giving that a little look. But right up your alley, those things.
So this week, in what appears to be the most excruciatingly humid day of human existence. We're going to explore the induction process. And as always, I think it makes sense to start with definitions. What is induction and what should be included?
Okay, so I think I was thinking about this question, and I think I found just a dictionary definition to start with, which I thought was a quite nice point to sort of launch off from. It says induction is the process for welcoming newly recruited employees and supporting them to adjust to their new roles and working environments. And I thought what I'd do is I'll break that down into different parts. So he said welcoming is the first sort of word that I would pick out of that definition. That for me, induction needs to first of all make sure that we need to make sure there's an environment that is welcoming to people, and we need to set up a place that creates psychological safety for people. That has to happen in the very first instance, because anybody working in anybody sort of in a place of work doesn't want to come to work having fear. Now, I know we just talked about accountability. That, yes, of course, accountability is important, but accountability isn't fear. And that's something that, that is the very first thing you need to get down, getting that culture across, that welcoming culture across to staff that step across your threshold, and making sure that they feel instantly part of something bigger. So that was the first part of that. So welcoming new recruits, welcoming new recruited employees and supporting them. Right, supporting. That's massive. That idea. We'll unpack it a bit later on, I'm sure. But ensuring everybody has what they need in terms of regards like resourcing and access to things, so that they can feel psychologically safe and they can feel like they do their job. That's another key element to it. Finally, then, supporting them to adjust to their new roles and working environments. So the adjust part there, and for me, that's like putting the relevant things in place that give people the best chance at onboarding, and the relevant institutional knowledge as quickly as possible, so to allow them to assimilate into the staff body and to become part of that team, that welcoming team that we set out we endeavour to sort of create. So that's a kind of that in my head. It was some of the key things that I saw induction as being at first and foremost a place of safety, psychological safety, and a place of welcoming and trust, because you take a leap of faith. People, when they go to a new role, yes, we've had an interview process. Yes, we've looked the school up, we've had a walk around, we've read the Ofsted report, we've seen. We don't really know, do we? We don't really know what we're going into as a teacher or a leader into a new school until you get there, which is sort of crazy when you think about our jobs. We kind of go in a bit blind on things, and I think that's that we need to do as much as we can to try and alleviate the sort of guesswork that a new member of staff will potentially face stepping into a school. Because there is going to be an element of that. You're not going to know where the cupboard, where the RE books are kept or whatever on your first day, your second day there. Not that you'd need RE on the second day, but Adam would kill me for saying that. But it's a consideration, isn't it? Like how we understand that people will have a sense of right, and obviously depending on the level of expertise coming in as well. Some people will think, well, I'll use common sense. I know that my previous models, my mental models, this was there, so I'll go and try that. But you try and remove as much guesswork from them as you possibly can to sort of help the process.
I love that. These general principles, and really, really important ones too, that you're speaking to here. Essentially, we want to make sure that everyone's safe and ready to perform their role to the best of their ability. And I think that's a fantastic definition of induction, and certainly better than anything I could have created to describe the process. I've been inducted quite a few times. There have been a lot of similarities. I think I'll send it to you first, and then I'll sort of talk about the experience that I had, and just in case, there might be some overlap. What does induction typically look like? And what are the possible strengths and weaknesses? Emphasis on weaknesses, possibly.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to sort of launch off Tony Blair style, communication, communication, communication. That it all rests in the first instance on that. And we know how important communication is in schools. We've done whole episodes on this before, how important it is. Where it fails often is it can be communication. So, and this can be in two fronts. So it can be over communication or under communication. So and you've been in this position. I know I've been in this position before, where moving jobs, you've got 1 foot in one school and 1 foot in another school at the end, and that's a really hard place to be bridging schools, because you've still got your commitments to the current place you're at. You're trying to tie up professionally there. However, you've got one eye on the coming challenges of your new place and the new knowledge acquisition that you need to do, and you know that the leaders from that school that you're going to, it's really important that either you're not bombarded with information, like too much information too early, and being brought into things too early, and not, and just being included in threads of emails straight away, and you don't know who everybody is, and it's sort of like, but they need to get their head around this early. So the best thing is to just give them the exposure to it, and they'll start getting their head around it. Realistically, you're probably not going to get your head around it until you're actually in the building. So yeah, when the shoe's on the other foot, in terms of communication, if you get nothing at all, and you're kind of left in the dark, thinking, well, what's happening over there? And you land on the first day, and it's like, bam, it's like a shell shock, and you get hit with all this information. So that's also not what we want from the induction process. So communication in that first sense was my first point. So kind of on the same line of communication, sharing of documents. So that kind of comes with communication. So like another important codified information or literature ahead of your induction process. Again, I actually think it can be useful to share a certain amount of core things that you probably add a caveat to, that we don't expect you to have digested all of this, but here it is if you'd like to. And I think that's another thing in the communication process, that you can say to people, you take that pressure off, creates that psychological safety. Oh, okay, this person cares that I want to know, but also isn't putting too much pressure on me at the same time. And striking that balance between not overloading people, so that they don't feel overwhelmed. Because again, when it goes wrong, think about those weaknesses is where we said before, where you've been given every one of the school policies to look at before you've started in September, and you're not really going to have any time to digest the SMSE policy before I start. So I think we just need to be reasonable about that with leaders. Another thing potentially that can go wrong is when schools either don't get people across at all before for a transition day or any transition time, or they are trying to pull people too much away from their schools. Because if they're trying to say to people, right, we want you over for all this time, we're going to pay your current school. The bottom line is current schools aren't going to be very happy with that situation. If you're asking for like a week, 2 weeks of induction, even when they're paid, the bottom line is you're taking a teacher away from their school and their class and their context, who know the school. And I think there needs to be an appreciation from, and a sort of like mutual nods to each other in terms of working out what is a healthy amount of time to come across to a school. And it may be that both schools can work something out, where it is a bigger amount of time, but really does have to be a kind of a process where it's mutual. And I find another probable sort of weakness is if you do come across for some transition time, lovely, you turn up and there's no real agenda. So you come in and it's like, great, this is Joe Bloggs, the year 2 leader and teacher. You're going to be with them for the day. So, and you're working with them next year. So I'll just leave you to it and be like, yeah, great. And Joe Bloggs isn't prepared, because Joe Bloggs has just been told a couple of days in advance and is like, oh yeah, right. So just sort of shadow me today, and we'll we'll work it out as we go. And but I think on a couple of levels, one, for the person coming in, that's a bit like, sends a message of, oh, well, you weren't expecting me, and that says a lot about value and psychological safety straight away. Two, it doesn't look very good as a school if you're going to do that. Like, if you're going to not have that level of organization ahead of somebody coming. So, I think that's really, really important. But also, again, I'll flip it around. Again, some of the issues you can face, it might not be that person's fault. It might be the leader above them that's sort of made this arrangement and hasn't really properly briefed the teacher or briefed the leader that is expecting, like, the incoming inductee, and not giving them the sort of correct prep, if you will, before they've arrived. So it might be that it's not a good time for them, and it doesn't, yet they've tried to ram this transition day in, and actually, sometimes that can do you a disservice. It can do the person who's having it a disservice, because they're seeing this potential person they're going to work with next year or whatever not in the best light. And if that's your first, and we say, about first impression, if that's your first experience at school, again, going back to that psychological safety, you're thinking, oh, hang on, that's this, he was frosty, or and it's not necessarily his fault, because he's got, his plate might be too full and his cognitive load and all the rest of it. So, you've got to consider these things. So that's another thing I think the last thing I would say in terms of weakness, I'd hand it back to you, Kieran, to talk about your experiences, is the time of year is happening as well. Like, I know we're talking about September now, we're talking about probably, and most people out there now, when this goes out, thinking about current transit, everything I just talked about, transition with September. But we know as well, forecasting, sometimes teachers leave in year, don't they? And that happens, and there's circumstances out of control. We've got to think carefully if that happens, like what that means for teachers coming in, and what that induction process, they're coming in hot, if you will. It's very, very challenging to pick up mid-year from a class. So, I mean, that's probably another whole episode in itself, but it's a consideration anyway. So
yeah, I mean, I think if you have got that situation where it's a mid-year sort of vacancy fill, I think you should just be grateful that you've got someone there. And obviously we want them to be as impactful and proficient as possible. But I think, if we have someone leave in January, the fact that we've got someone in January, I think is sufficient, and then we can start fresh in September, because, once you get to the Six Nations, the year just disappears. I can remember when Ireland won the Six Nations this year, and I remember your tears. And the tears.
Fine when it was as well. I maintain they're going to win the World Cup. You won't have it, but I maintain they're going to be in the final, near enough the final, or winning it. But anyway, we'll see.
Peak too soon. But me and my colleagues sort of talk about how once you get to that point in the year, speed just ramps up big time. And so I think we just as school leaders, we're thankful we've got someone, because it could be a situation where you've got 13 different teachers in a class over the rest of that year. That's not an uncommon conversation I have with friends who are teachers. I am with colleagues about the number of supply teachers they need to have in, because they can't find anyone permanent. So, I think when we're talking about that kind of hot induction, I think a sort of slight recalibration of the expectation is quite often needed. I mean, you mentioned transition days. Again, as a teacher or as a leader, I often just use those transition days to get to know the other people who'll be working there, and try and spend as much time as possible with those who will still be in post. Because sometimes you can get the outgoing person, particularly if you're a school leader. Say you're the deputy head and you're the new deputy head, and the outgoing deputy head gets lumbered with you for the day, or however many days it is. They're not necessarily the best person to spend your time talking to. So it's like, can you start building relationships with the people who will be there, the people who you're probably going to work most closely with, or even just trying to scope out who seems keen, because there's a likelihood you're coming in, you're going to be making changes. Certainly in the circumstances that we quite often find ourselves joining new schools, there are changes to be made. And so I won't even prepare questions about the day-to-day run of the school in June, July, because everybody's flat out, everyone's trying to fit in a million different things. It's excruciatingly hot. So let's just build relationships, I think. In September, quite often, there are some commonalities, lots of documents, lots of opportunities to talk to key people across the school. And I think in September, you might have an idea about the questions you want to ask them as you go into those meetings. I would quite often in my last role sit down with any new teacher and explain my 20 minutes on how to effectively use high quality textbooks or high quality curricula, because that's the minimum you need to know going into one of our classes. Here's the underlying pedagogy. Everything else will come from that. But at the very least, you need to know that this is not open up at page 23 and continue from page 23. And what I actually did was I recorded all of the CPD I delivered over 5 years in small 15 to 20 minute segments, because obviously with the tasks that people did, they're not 45 minutes, an hour long. So now they've still got that stuff despite me moving on. So they can literally drip feed those short bits of CPD to their new teachers. And we've discussed before about how they often grow their own teachers. So people will have some idea, but then let's put some hard pedagogy on top of that, because then you've got the lived experience. And so let's solidify that and start with the most impactful stuff. But my inductions, I've had difficult conversations with outgoing school leaders, or I've had, conversations with people who weren't going to be there, and they thought, well, why have I just spent the last 90 minutes talking to this person? Maybe it's helpful, but I think it's more helpful to focus on what your priorities are and how best to build those relationships, because you're never really going to feel comfortable until probably 3/4 of the way through the first year, I reckon, because then you've got time to get to grips with the institutional knowledge that's necessary to exist within the ecosystem. You've worked out who to push and who to give a wide berth on certain days of the week and stuff like that there, and so then you can sort of you can push on, say, May time, and then you're starting to plan for the following year. So I think your experience maps up with mine, and I thought I've thought about this as a teacher, so it might be worth sharing.
Yeah, it's quite. I think echo your point completely there about an incoming leader speaking to the outgoing person is it can be really revealing as well as actually damaging. It can be both of those things, and you've just got to be very cautious. You've got to have your sort of your psychological shield up, if you will, because it's you're dealing with a sort of potentially sort of difficult situation there. But so that's a really good point I thought about.
I analyze every conversation I'm having. Sometimes while I'm having the conversation, it's quite a painful existence, but I've always got that shield up. So, with this in mind, the system's not terrible, because teachers get inducted every year, do a great job. Life continues, life finds a way. But if we think systematically about this, if we think about maximizing the time we have with our teachers, because it's limited by nature, how might we better induct new teachers into our school? And how do we balance policy with pedagogy?
Really good question, this. Really, really good question. And, I think one of the mainstays to getting this balance right is the time allocation, isn't it? It's how we spend time. Ultimately, loads of stuff we do in teaching comes down to the currency of time and how we spend it. And I think this is where smart strategic thinking around induction processes is really important. And how you balance, like you just said it, how you balance that institutional knowledge against the pedagogical knowledge, where everything is and how we do it, it's so challenging. It's challenging, when you think about it, because we do certainly with ours, and Lucy's very good at this, it's about how we look at what we did the year prior all the time and go, did we get it right for them? Did we get it right for them? I'm talking to them and asking, how did you feel it? After they're out with it, long past it, what was hard? What was hard for you? What was the hardest thing coming in as a leader? What, you landed, what we did this, did that help? What was, and talking to people like that, because they'll often just tell you, what it was that they were struggling with, or that put a lot of pressure on them at certain points. So I think getting that understanding from past staff is a really helpful starting point for just when you're trying to shape the process and making sure that you balance those two things. So I get in terms of how we looked at it this year. You hit the nail on the head just a minute ago, and you said people don't really get into this stride until term 3, really. Realistically, they come up for air at the other side of Christmas and start to go, okay, I think I know everybody now, and I think I know where the photocopier is, and I know where the policies are kept on the drive, and all the rest of it. You start to get that stuff locked down and start to be themselves a little bit. I feel, and hopefully, like, they feel safe then, and they really do think like, oh yeah, I've got a real good level now. So it's interesting you said that, because this year we've got 3 new staff incoming. We've got quite a few members of staff shifting year groups, up to 6 and around and about. And we've got a bit of movement this year. So we've been really, really carefully discussing what the best process would be for induction, for staff internally moving year groups, and like I said, for those external staff. What does that look like? What can we do to help facilitate this the best? So in terms of trying to work out that balance between pedagogy and sort of institutional knowledge, we've opted for a model where, now, as you know, I've spoken on the pod before about the fact we do instructional coaching, and we run our professional development pathway model, which 1 week we coach, 1 week we do our PD, shorter PD sessions, and a snappy, and we run that, and we run them in sets, long and thin. So, but the reality is, like, for the induction process, it's like, like I say, balancing that pedagogical stuff. I can't be going, right, what we're going to do, we roll out a new RE scheme in September, and those 3 members of staff don't know how to do English in our school. That's ridiculous. When you actually think about it, and actually 3 members of staff have moved year groups, so they're just trying to get their head around the kingdom of Benin. So what's the point in trying to then push curriculum change at that point? It's futile. So we realize that, and we've gone, actually, we need to shape our model differently this year. So what we've done is we've decided on having an initial hit of like the first couple of PD sessions, the first 3 or 4 PD sessions, to be subject summary sessions, where we're going to get subject leaders, to do 20-minute slots, giving the ins and outs of their subject, where to find everything, a general overview about how we do it. It's a whistle-stop tour of the subject, but it gives all staff a nice refresher, and new staff are like, oh, okay, this is how they do RE, this is how they do MFL, this is how they use language angels. Okay. So for 3 weeks, literally just using 20-minute slots in all of the PD sessions, just to give people that, and we're going to film them all. Now, I go back to videos. Codifying things on videos on the central drive is a really, really useful thing to do, because then, like you say, if you do get any hot landings mid-year, you can create some space and create some time for them to watch videos. It means then busy people in year are not having to run training and stuff. You can get them to watch things as well. It's the same with routines. It's the same with lining up and other cultural things in the school as well. You can record all that, which is something we're aiming to do as well, to help that process. So we've done that. We've said the first week landing, it's like a landing set of sort of summaries. And then we finished the end of our sort of, we've mapped our inset date to be at the end of September, actually, the second one, where we are going to launch from that point our mentoring model. So we are switching away from instructional coaching at that point, back to a mentoring model, and we're going to do that until T3, because we realized, like you said, people are going to need help. They're going to need telling where things are and how we do things, and they're going to need an opportunity for somebody more expert to feed into them and say, and check in with them and run through key priorities of the school and go over bits and pieces. And we've laid out, actually did it today earlier with my phase leader Jack and Lucy. We laid the framework for what we want in those mentoring sessions out for the first 2 terms. And we've aligned that with our SLP and our priorities, but also with the knowledge we think is going to be really, really institutional stuff that's going to be really, really important for the new staff that are landing and the staff that are moving. And we're going to run that then up until T3. Now, we've had to pair carefully. We've had to pair experts kind of experienced people from year groups and senior leaders overseeing a year group, and we're all going to take a year group. So like I'm going to oversee year 4 and 5, Lucy's going to oversee year 3, Jeff's going to, you know, and we've got and so on and so forth. And we're kind of like accountable for that year group from a mentoring perspective, and we will share right at the very beginning what the expectations for mentoring are, and kind of give them like an understanding of what I love, like why we're doing it, the rationale behind, as we always do, the why behind things. But also that idea that like, okay, if I'm mentoring year 5 or whatever, then it's not necessarily me coming in as the deputy head and cracking the whip, and you know, because that's another thing. I don't want them to feel like psychologically unsafe again, you know, because oh, I'm under the microscope, you've got the head, I've got the deputy, you know. It's like no, it's purely a supportive process. It's a process so we can help keep check and balance on how they're coping, and say, or you know, and we can. And the other thing it does, it gives us a constant line back in and out, like a lungs of our SLT meetings every week. So we've got this constant flow of information in and out from both a kind of pedagogical and sort of institutional level, but also like from on the ground as well. So like it's great. It just allows us to have that clarity, just to really ensure that we bed down routines, culture, that we make sure that everybody is kind of like making sure that our offer is sound across the board. Then in T3, like I said, after reviewing and reflecting, and if we need to extend, we'll extend. You know, we're not afraid to be responsive in that process as well, but we will then look to move back to our curriculum PDP development pathway, and then think about, right, that's when we start rolling out PISH and RE schemes that we've got set up as priorities for this year. It's like, that's how we're going to, then we'll launch in January from that point, because like you say, by that point, staff are going to be feeling, okay, I'm ready to now take some stuff on board here. Because the bottom line is we do, you know, we have to move. Of course we have to move, you know, like you can't stand still in teaching, you can't stand still in curriculum development. We know that, but you also need to be reasonable about your context and about induction, and about the fact that you are going to have to induct both within internally and with external people coming in as well. So yeah, so shifting back then to that IC and that granular model and that kind of pathway then as well. Now, I think, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, I like to think we're quite forward thinking. Lucy's very forward thinking and willing to give things a go and break the mold a little bit on how to do things. And so, like, again, like I always say with things, we'll see how it goes. We might get to that point and think, well, we should have pulled the plug on that back in end of T1. Or we might say, actually, this is not enough time still. We might go go like 3 terms and then 3 terms, you know, like, and that might be a better balance. But you'll only know unless you try and iterate and you sort of, and it also changes and depends on the amount of expertise you've got coming in as well, isn't it? If you've got loads of ECTs coming in, or have you got loads of a mixture of, we've got some more experienced staff coming in, so we just need to make sure that they you know, that they have it. Because the other thing as well is, if you've got a leader coming in, you know, you've got to think about a leadership induction. That's a whole nother thing, you know, about how you make sure a leader gets their feet on the ground. And, you know, and if it's a teaching leader, or if it's a non-teaching leader, what are the considerations there? What do they need? Do they need sort of more time, and so on and so forth? So that's sort of how we've thought about balancing our pedagogical stuff with time. And to give you a flavor of the framework, like some of those sessions are around like how to write pupil progress, like how to put together a pupil progress document and interpret the signals that the data has given us, you know, and to work with teachers to, you know, if they're not used to working with data, and how unreliable it can be and noisy it can be, and actually it gives us signals, and how do we build those signals and make those kind of inferences from what we can see in our formative judgments and so on, and put all that together. You know, it's things like that, sessions like that, sessions where we're going to go back over like the moderation process, how we moderate in year, but just within year in a close setting, not in a big room of moderation, just something a bit more close, a bit more personal, a bit less threatening in that sense. So you know, we've thought carefully, we've mapped the framework out, and we've got a structure that we're going to use mentoring structure, which, you know, I'm happy to share at some point what that kind of pro forma looks like and how we're going to run that model for stock. But that's sort of where we are with how we are going to hopefully better induct, going back to the question, the teachers than we have done previously, and how we've thought carefully there about the time they have to do things like institutional stuff, like how we do group progress, versus the kind of pedagogical stuff, like how we teach English, or like how we do error tracking in maths, or, you know, these kinds of things as well. They're important sessions to have, and close sessions where hopefully that, like, we build that trust and safety with stuff.
I mean, if I were to summarize what I think you've said, I think it comes down to expectations. One, you've got very sensible expectations of the rate at which your teachers or your new staff will assimilate into their environment. Assimilate, the right word? And you've put systems in place that acknowledge this, but also you're very clear about what is expected, and you've actually set that out as part of their induction training. Because, I mean, I feel safest when I know my brief, when there are clear expectations of what's expected of me, because then I can take that information and I can go off and action it. You know, that's when I thrive. And I imagine that's fairly similar for most people. You know, I'm trying to think of a situation in which you might not feel like that. Perhaps, I don't know if you prefer to work more solo than as part of a team, you know, then it might be different. And, you know, obviously I'm happy to be proven wrong. But I think just like children enjoy those boundaries, adults at work enjoy those boundaries. And so the fact that you're outlining, okay, here's how we want those pupil progress reports to be completed, well, that avoids difficult conversations, or will goes a long way to avoiding difficult conversations later when, for instance, you've got a very important report for the local authority and it hasn't been completed to a satisfactory standard. Because we know those reports can be the turning point in a tribunal, for instance. And so knowing, okay, this is how I fill this in, this is the information that's needed, I think it's really important. It's like in safeguarding forms, knowing not to write down what you think, just write down the facts. You know, that's the kind of form I like filling in. Okay, here's what happened, keep your biases out of it, and then let the process do its work, you know? So I think that's brilliant. And I think that if I were working in your school, I would feel supported in executing my role effectively. Now, if I'm a teacher who's been with you for a while, and I know you've got a few who've been there since the whole time you've been there and perhaps longer, are they in receipt of the training, or do they continue on their instructional coaching pathway? What's that sort of distribution like?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, you know, we had to make a decision whether these teachers, you know, was it feasible to allow these teachers to be able to do something different. The reality of it is there wasn't a model in which we could allow them to do, we just didn't have the capacity to be able to say, you can, you know, because the bottom line is, it's quite, you know, it's resource heavy. I see, you know, we know it, like, you know, capacity heavy, you know, it pulls on a lot of people, and we just felt like we couldn't do both of those things. We had to say, well, actually, what are there benefits for those teachers going over things and just reconnecting? And what we found was actually a lot of those teachers are the mentors. So they're actually developing themselves in terms of, you know, their own professional development from how they're supporting others, and often, you know, when we talk about praise, or, you know, and things about like how they're growing themselves and how they're growing themselves as leaders, a lot of those staff are middle leaders anyway, because they or senior, because they've been there so long, they've kind of moved up. So they're actually doing the mentoring. So that's kind of how we have addressed that side of things. And we've asked people, is this something that you would like, you know, would you benefit from this? And like I said, because we've got those movements in year groups, because we've got people coming in and new relationships on, they were all actually like, yeah, we would really like that. That would be really, really helpful for us, because it just gives us a bit of space to kind of settle as well, and like, and allow the team around them to settle. because again, we know what it's like when you've got someone incoming. It can be just as much work for the existing teachers trying to prop up somebody, and we mustn't forget that's a very good, it's another point to consider, isn't it? How much work that can have on somebody who's been existing and been there a while to a newbie dropping, and then because all of that kind of informal, right, I'll just help show you to this, right, I'll just show you to that, adds up, and it has an impact, and we all know that when we've worked in year groups where we've been there a few years and with somebody, it's like second nature. You've automized stuff so much you forget, and then when someone comes in, you remember again. So that's so where we are with it.
Nice. And if Dale's cone of experience has taught us anything, is that people remember 90% of what they teach other people. So I think you're on to a winner there.
And Dale's cone starts at the top and comes back to Dale's cone and reemerges as Dale's cone again.
Yes, it's the beast that the serpent that's eaten its own tail.
Its own tail
in the lead up to Ragnarok. So I can't wait for that one.
The endless referencing Luke beast.
But no, on a serious note, I think it's great because it makes a lot of sense. Because like you said, some of that tacit knowledge, you do it without even thinking about it, don't you? I mean, if I'm thinking about brand new teachers on their first day of induction, I think there are three things I'd want them to go in thinking about. First is understanding how we learn, and the idea that, no one is expecting you to remember everything on day one. That's not how memories are formed, and you need meaningful connections. Like you said, that's why it takes 2 or 3 terms, because you're making meaningful connections within your institutional model or your mental model of the institution. Note taking is extremely important. I must have been I've said this before, couple of months into my NQT year before I realized that note taking would have been beneficial and that I couldn't remember everything. So take those notes and build a system where you can refer back to them. And then the third one is don't feel bad about leaving early on your first couple of days. So say you've got 2 inset days, you're not going to have as much work as everybody else. So make the most of the time while you can, because I always feel guilty. I'll just hang around. But actually, unless you get a classroom to get ready, and as long as you're ready for the next day, we'll make the most, because once September gets rolling, there's no stop until Christmas, really. You got that big 14-week term, and it's the 14-week term in which most of the learning happens for me, I think, because it's the biggest uninterrupted period of the year. And what you find then is the spring and summer terms are full of constant interruptions. And so if you haven't made the most of those first 14-ish weeks, then you might be on the back foot. So if on the 1st of September, I think that's a Friday this year, you get the chance to go at 3:30, do, because no one's going to resent it, because you're certainly going to make up for it at some point in the rest of the
Yeah, that
sounds quite an evil laugh.
Sinister.
A laugh born of experience. I mean, we're halfway through the questions, so it would be remiss of me not to play the Ko-fi song. But I do need to talk to you about it beforehand, because we've had a few more Ko-fi subscribers, which means the song is, for all intents and purposes, out of date. And what I was thinking, let me pitch this to you now, Lloyd. I was thinking Dr. Jones by Aqua, right? It's G, F, and C.
Okay.
In various different, which is very close, if not the same key as the Tadape theme tune.
Yeah, it's not far off. Yeah.
What if we use that as the model for the next song, and perhaps in the next couple of weeks we had to, because I know I asked you about craft work, but maybe that's a bit too experimental. What do you think, Lloyd? Could we make that happen with the new people's details included?
I can give it a go. Just the new people. So just the new people having a little.
No, I think
special...
everyone. I think everyone, and every time new people come on board, we will endeavour to create a new theme tune.
A massive song at the end. Yeah, I will see what I can do. I will leave it to my my creative sort of domain. I will try and have a little look at it for you. See what I can come up with. Sure, I can rustle something up.
Fantastic.
Hi, Barbie. There you go.
For all of you Kofi, Kofi, Kofufu, however you pronounce it, you damn lovely supporters. It's a song going out to you, to you. Okay, here we go. Nikki, Anna P, Septi, Stephanie Taylor, Mrs. B, Esatea, Adam, Katie, Liv Dempsey, Becca, Jenford, Susie Brown, and Sio, Netchio, Rachel, I am Al, Jessica, Tom Oakley, Tom Brassington, Jessica, Tom Oakley, Tom Brassington, LJ, and last but not least, my lovely little Amy Bill. So they help us pay the bills. So a massive thank you out to Dappy family. Coffee supporters help us keeping it ad-free. There's far more content coming just round the bend. Thank you all for helping our very special friends. Friends. Very special friends.
Right. So we're into the second half and probably 3 shorter questions, maybe 2, because I think we've answered the final one. If you only had 3 slots as part of your induction process, what would you fill them with and how would you prioritize them?
Are we talking the 3 you've just described, or are we talking more serious? Because obviously if we're thinking a bit more robust, it's got to be safeguarding. I mean, that's a stand that, and I feel like that's a cop out of an answer. I feel like it's an answer that I'll answer without safeguarding, with the caveat that obviously safeguarding is the first thing you need to make sure that is in place. I'll answer like that. So I'd say the first, so 3 slots. I'm going to go with, first of all, launching from principles, value, and culture. You've got to, what you're all about. You've got to make sure that they are fully invested in the kind of the why of your school, what you're all about, and making. Now, hopefully, they've accepted the job on the basis that in the interview process and all the other things and the tours and they get an idea of that. But it's your first opportunity to really impress upon somebody what you're all about and what your expectations are around the culture that is in the school. I think that has, for me, that's got to come first, that vision and kind of the principles that you go by. I would say that is my first slot. Second slot, I think it's important to go to your teaching and learning policy and to go to actually say, right, where do we base our instruction from? Because all schools, like you say, we have an approach, knowledge rich, direct instruction, kind of built around retrieval. All those things, all the stuff that we know is effective around learning. Having a session around that and making sure that they're really clear on this underpins all of our subjects in the school, and that's it. So that's really, really key for me. Thirdly, I was umming and ahhing about this. I was thinking about, is it actually subject priorities then, that you have an overview, but you wouldn't be able to squeeze it all in. It wouldn't be enough. So I thought potentially, and I talked to Lucy about this. I asked Lucy this question earlier, and we sort of had a conversation about it. What are the year group priorities for you? Are you in a standards year group? Because they're big considerations. Are you in a year group that has the MTC? Are you in a year group that has the phonics check? Are you in a year group which, year 2 is no longer a standards year, but there are often priorities that come along with your year group, and identifying those and understanding what that means for your year group, because they have implications. And I think it's really, really important that if you are incoming, that you understand that, whether that's year 6, year 4, year 1, your UIFS, whatever it is, that you have a really good understanding of what your year group priorities are and how that fits to the school priorities as well. What are the overall, what's the SLP, what's the overall aim this year as a school? I think it's important that they know that, our SLP is quite tight. We don't overload it. We've just got nice priorities. writing, foundation assessment, whatever it is. Just these are the things we're going to look at. And you don't need to bombard them with lots of information on it. Just want to give them a kind of nice tight summary and get them to talk about it a little bit so they really understand which direction the school's going in with development. That's kind of how I would look potentially. I find that question really hard because it's like, because I would say like, you're not having 3 slots, you're having 300 slots for induction. But yeah, that was my things that I think are quite pertinent. And Lucy and I agreed on that they've been quite pertinent.
I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head, because culture is so important. It's schools live and die by it. Absolutely spot on, because you're talking about feeling safe and knowing it's the right place for you. The culture essentially is what you use to measure that, because if you're pushing in a different direction from the culture of the school, well then it might not necessarily be the best place for it. But I hope before you've got the induction phase, you've realized that the culture of the school is somewhere. I know it's not always the case, but 9 times out of 10, I hope people realize the situation they're getting themselves into. Teaching learning policy, I've talked before, when I spoke to Craig Barton, talked about those highest leverage changes you can make to your practice, instruction, and and you're talking about being knowledge rich and things like that there. That makes the biggest difference. You can buy yourself a whole lot of time if you get to the point where your teachers are effective explainers of new knowledge and new concepts, so I 100% agree there. And things like the MTC, you don't hit the ground running in September, then you're pushing uphill against sludge or something like that there, because I don't know, we've talked before about how pupils who come in to year 4 and are roughly scoring 18 out of 25 on, for instance, things like sound check on TTRS. Those kids are generally on track to learn their times tables before the end of the academic year. But with the children who are not, you need to put systems in place that allow them to sort of bridge that gap and join their peers, because we know how important that knowledge is in year 5 and in year 4 to an extent too, but certainly in 5 and 6. No point in trying to engage with fractions in the way that we hope they will if you don't know your times tables. So things like that, if you get it right in September, the rest of the year is so much easier. So, I find it very difficult to disagree with your 3, but it is unfortunately the wrong answer, because the right answer is maths, structures of arithmetic, and fractions. Those are the 3 things that all teachers need to learn about on their first day in school. And ideally, you bring me in to teach them all about those 3 things.
I was so wrong. I was so wrong.
I'm glad you've realized that.
It's interesting. Yeah, I have. I've erred in my ways. I'll whip myself tonight because of that. And that's not the cold drop either. So there's too many cold drops in this episode.
You're a cold drop.
I mean, it's just a nightmare. Like, I am a nightmare. There's another one. So yeah, no. Just going back to what you're saying there about MTC stuff and about you're absolutely right. Like, we have same day intervention model where we use, like, obviously there's senior leaders doing assemblies every day. Like, fully took from Matt Swain and Step, and we were inspired by those guys there. It's just great, and it's just such a good model for us. Like, it creates that guaranteed space for teacher intervention as well. Teacher intervention, which is the biggest, most powerful one. They're the experts in the room at the end of the day. And it's exactly that. That's exactly what we do. We sort of load year 4, and we look at the balance of what SDIs are for, and obviously in year 4 they're largely weighted to MTC, and we learned that the hard way. We learned that by sort of doing our mastery decks them, and we've got a really clear structured program and review points and like sort of mock checks that we do all year, and we collect on insight and we run averages, and as well as the data from TT Rockstars as well, and in tandem, it's tribe stuff. But it's like you said, you're new. You need to know that that's a thing in your year group, and so yes, I think it's important.
So how do we know if induction has been successful?
So I think, this sort of two ways to do this. I think, like, from some schools that have like a probationary period where they, and academies certainly do, some academies have probationary periods where you can set up review. But the main thing is the review, right? Reviews and check-ins. This is how we make sure that this is, like, so when we induct staff and how we do it, and certainly with our, from a TA perspective, even, we need to work at it a bit more with our teachers. How we cap our kind of, like, within the first couple of weeks, or certainly in the first 2 weeks, for example, of when you teach it, where are those touch points where they meet leaders? Start of the day, end of the day, just pop in and see me at 4 if you can, or not overbearing, but just literally pop in and see me if you think you need to, if you feel like you need to come in and see us. And then we will have a Friday after, whatever, Thursday after school, we'll have a general review and go, right, what's working, what's not working, great. And then having really clear structured distribution in your leadership, then if there are things that come back, how does that kick into place? Where does that information flow to? Does it go to phase leaders and then down to how does it? Who does involve? And just having a really clear process and systems. Now we're still refining that for our place. We realize that that's really important part. We've got it really right for our TAs. We haven't quite nailed it down yet for our teachers, and it's something that we're currently working on that is really, really important. I feel like that's some of the key to it, and I think coming to a point not being afraid to say, if it's not necessarily that it hasn't been successful, but if it needs longer, being like building in capacity so that you can extend if you need to. And because we're so often quick to, we know, right, they're getting paid that wage, they're good, they're experts, we expect them to just get on with it, crack on with it. And it's like, well, actually, you got to be reasonable with people, and you've got to say, well, they need a bit more time to get their heads around this. So let's just extend the support for them a little bit more. It's not weakness. It's about good leadership in identifying when we need to help people and when we need to say, actually, and then knowing that balance. Of course, there's about, go back to that accountability. Of course, there's going to be a release. There's going to be a time where that is going to start to move over, and you say, well, actually, I do need you to sort of have, to go a little bit now, because you can't induct forever. Of course, you can't, and that's ridiculous. But I think, again, go back to communication and having set review points and check-in procedures lined up. That, I think, will give you a really good indication as to whether it's worked or not, because they'll tell you if it's worked or not. Also, you will be able to see if you're, we're hoping through this mentoring, what we're going to do is we're going to, like, say, have our framework that we're going to mentor from. We're going to do we do theme walks. So we will walk the school sort of the week, and we're going to do sort of preemptive theme walks. So we're going to walk the week before with an idea of what we're looking at. Then we're going to mentor the year group on it. Then we're going to go back out and walk and see what we see and look at the next bit of the framework. And then we're going to continue that process and and then that feeds back into our SLT meetings on a Monday. And we have that as a regular agenda item. We discuss what we see and how it's going. And we're going, yeah, this is working. This is good. Yeah. How's it going in your year groups? Yeah. And we have our pro formas, and we can share in. And as a leader, deputy, as a head, I can check other people's pro formas in terms of from their mentoring sessions and say, oh yeah, great, that's going well there, or there's a bit of an issue there. How do we need to remedy or help there? So it's having those, again, I'll go back to it, systems and processes, and communicating all that out to everybody so that you can really get a temperature on whether that induction is, stabilizers off, let's go sort of thing, and let's kick into our BDP. So
nice. I mean, I really like that you say it's not about being unsuccessful, but it's about needing longer. So obviously we know with the kids, the biggest variable in mastery learning and mastering something is time. Some children will need more time than others. So why wouldn't that be the same for teachers? I mean, it can't possibly human nature, but many people can see struggling as a sign of weakness, rather than part of the learning process or as a natural part of any transition. And sometimes they might be reticent to signal that they're having difficulties or that things aren't going as smoothly as possible. And so do you find that those checking procedures you have in place, those systems and processes, mitigate for this? Or does that sometimes bleed into the conversations you have? And what would your approach be in that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. I mean, I think, we all have biases as leaders, and it's something that how we, when we're doing our checks and balances, and when we're doing our support, and when when we're having those conversations, we need to be really mindful of is this a kind of individual level struggle, or is this a systemic struggle? Is it like a systems level struggle? And I guess that comes from us quality assuring ourselves as leaders around the table to say, okay, so and so is struggling with this, and that's being able to have those conversations around the senior leadership table to go, yeah, they're struggling with this a bit as well, and going, rather than going, what's happening there? That's being knee jerk and sitting and trying to pin it on poor performance as such. To, hold the mirror up. Is this a systems problem? Is this something here that's not right on a bigger scale that's causing the issue? And it can be just one person potentially that it affects. That's another bias that we can easily say, well, it's only this one person that's struggling with this thing, so it must be just them. It's not always the case. You've got to be honest in your leadership, and you've got to be able to challenge each other, not emperor's new clothes. It's we've got to be able to say, actually, is this working? Because what teachers are very good at doing is masking, and they're very good at, and I think the most superior example of this currently is the current SEND situation in Kent, where you've got 87% of schools in Kent are good or better. The HMI and the inspector are saying, right? Yet the local authority is in a sort of catastrophic state of ministerial accountability. And Ofsted is saying, what is happening? Why is that so broken? And that schools are still, because under the SEND, obviously under Ofsted, they assess SEND. So what's happening? Well, I'll tell you what's happening is the teachers and schools are masking the problems that are sitting beneath them, and they're at breaking point because leaders and schools can't cope because they're masking stuff. So that kind of is a perfect real world analogy, current analogy of what we can sometimes suffer as leaders in our schools and our leadership schools on a smaller scale, with potentially a teacher doing the same thing, or where you've got one teacher maybe telling you a lot more than you think it is, because there's others around you are masking. So I think that's stuff that we, again, goes back to culture of leadership in our school, and how we challenge and how we are open and how we're transparent with what we do to try and prevent some of that stuff happening, and get those honest kind of reflections so that we can iterate appropriately based on the feedback that we get from the induction process. I
mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, catastrophic is a very polite way to describe what has been a very difficult situation. And I think that was being mild. The way you've spoken about it so eloquently, I think will really hit home with anyone who's familiar with that situation. And you're right, that masking is something that we do very well for one reason or another. And so I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of how you can mitigate for that almost natural reluctance to admit weakness that can often exist. And it's about being aware that this is a phenomenon that exists, and we want to make sure everyone is successful within our schools, adults and children alike. And so what can we do to support them? And like you said, holding that mirror up is a very good starting point. So yeah, so very wise words. I mean, are you going to blog about this or do a talk on this at all? Because it's fantastic stuff, Lloyd.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we're coming to the end of the research ed season, aren't we? Finishing. Actually, the last time I'll roll my talk up from this year will be at the national. So I probably need to write a new one then at some point about some of the stuff we've been doing, and perhaps that could be one, or something along the lines of culture and sort of development and processes and things. Food for thought.
Nice. And the next time we'll be in Dusseldorf, 21st of August.
We'll be there 21st of August. Research Ed Deutschland. So that'll be exciting. Yeah.
It's been so successful in terms of ticket sales that they actually need more speakers. So I'm definitely encouraging anyone who is listening and has anything they want to share about their practice and being research informed. I think the talks nowadays lean towards classroom experience of theories and phenomena that perhaps were discussed in the first wave of research ed talks. I remember the first time I went, it was very much, here's the theory, here's how it might look in the classroom. But over time, it's here, well, we've tried this out and this is what we've learned. So, you might think, I don't have the reading background. It's a fantastic experience. It's an extremely well-run conference, which makes a massive difference in terms of the quality of the experience for both delegates and speakers. Mm-hmm. But it's a chance to solidify your own thinking on things that you've been developing in your school, in your class. So if anyone's listening thinking, I might take a punt, go for it, because I couldn't recommend it enough. The team over there are fantastic. And, Dan was on a couple of times, and, one of my favorite episodes when he spoke about stress, that was a talk from that first Research Ed Deutschland. And I went up to him straight away afterwards and said, Dan, we need to sit you down for a couple of hours and chat about this, because it was fantastic. So, I think, I haven't seen any submissions are closed, but last time I think I'll pin the tweet so that anyone can find it easily this weekend. But definitely do. And, a few of the TAPE group are on their way out as part of their summer research talk tour.
It'll be fun. And like I say, absolutely all credit to Dan, because really smart guy, really smart thinker, and he'll organise a great conference out there. So,
I did have one more question about what if we were being inducted, but I think we've sort of covered that as we've gone. Yeah. So I think it probably feels right to wrap things up here. I think obviously we do have maybe a few more episodes branching out from this. Be interesting to hear how other schools approach this. But in the meantime, all I have to do is say thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me, Lloyd.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.
Go home. Anyway, sorry. That's not the code drop.
It.
Go home.